Here's what the temperature has been on our Earth. Now, one thing that kind of jumps out at you is, well, let me put it this way. If my classmate from the 6th grade that talked about Africa and South America were here, he would say, did they ever fit together?
Well, in fact, in an inconvenient truth, Al Gore used the graph of the Vostok ice cores. He said this proves that CO2 and temperature are directly causally related. But he didn't show that actually the temperature goes up first, usually by about 800 years before the CO2 goes up.
More CO2 equals a warmer world. True or false?
I don't know. I mean, it may be the other way around. Certainly a warmer world will lead to more CO2. But I'm not impressed that CO2 is a driver of global temperature. And there are so many other variables that are much more likely to have been responsible for that.
Here is where CO2 is now. Way above where it's ever been as far back as this record will measure.
Gore's chart may seem impressive, but the geologic record shows that CO2 levels in the distant past were far greater than they are today.
Now, let's take a look at some of these examples and how they work. For example, truncating the y-axis. Here's a bar graph, and bar graphs are, in a nutshell, they're meant to show the value of a number in terms of a length, i.e. the length of a bar. And so here we have the x-axis, 2009, quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. So this is time. And then you have the y-axis, which is going to be, in this case, the number of Americans on federal welfare, 94 million, 96 million, 98 million. Well, what's the problem here? Well, truncating the y-axis means that, in fact, of course, all of these bars actually start at 0. But for some arbitrary reason, we're just showing from 94 million. So it presents a very misleading indication of the actual differences in these bars. If you plotted them out, they'd look differently. A good example here that, I'm sure you've seen online, if Bush tax cuts expire, and this was a Fox News graphic showing, well, if they expired, here's what the top tax rate would be. Here's what they are now, here's what they would be. Wow, look at that jump. The top tax rate would jump significantly. Well, again, they're truncating the y-axis. For some reason, it's truncated at 34. It's randomly starting at 34. Both of these values, of course, actually start at 0. So if you were to actually plot out what the actual difference in these bars look like, it would actually look like this. And as you can see from this image, it looks quite a bit less impressive, the difference between these. So it would be a jump from here to here, rather than the jump from here to here. It looks different. It gives a false impression when you truncate the y-axis like that. So let's take a look at another example. From the Washington Post a couple years ago, the Wonk blog. You can't deny global warming after seeing this graph. Da, da, da. And this is a graph from the World Meteorological Association from a report that they did, and the report is linked up so you can go read it yourself. And basically this is the graphic that they have. It shows the global average temperature from 1880 at the dawn of the instrumental temperature record era, and up until 2001-2010, that decade. And this is a decade by decade plot of the global average temperature. And look, very clear trend. You have down in the 1880s, and then in the 1930s, and then up towards the modern era. Very clear, very distinct upward trend, exactly like what we've seen so many times before in so many other graphics. But here it is. You can't deny global warming because you've seen this graphic. Now, I guess there's a few things to quibble with here. First of all is that this is the old global warming believer canard, that there is anyone who is arguing that the world has not warmed since the Little Ice Age 150 years ago, ended 150 years ago. I don't know anyone who's arguing that. And certainly, if we look back at the last 11,700 years of the Holocene interglacial epoch that we're in, of course, yes, temperatures absolutely have been rising. So no one is denying that temperatures are rising. But for some reason, I guess this is supposed to destroy any doubt about the idea of anthropogenic global warming. Again, that's a canard. That's the wrong thing. But anyway, even disregarding that, let's take a look back at what we just learned about truncating the y-axis on a bar graph. Oh, wait. Yes, that's exactly what happened here. So what happens if you plot this on an actual bar graph that shows it well, in the way that it's supposed to be shown from the bottom of the y-axis. Well, here's a blog that did exactly that, took the exact same data from the WMO report and plotted it this way. Here the data appears in a bar graph if plotted with the y-axis starting at 13.4, and here's the chart they showed. Here's the data appears in a bar graph if plotted with the y-axis starting at 0, and this is actually what they're talking about. Which, again, it's the same data, but it looks different. It has a different perception, because now we understand we're talking about 0.8 degrees Celsius of warming, which is important. It is important because we're talking about a very minute gradient of temperature change over a very long period, measured to a very fine degree. In fact, a degree that is not justified given the level of uncertainty that is inherent in these numbers. But we'll come back to that point in a little bit later. But anyway, it's the exact same point. If this is misleading, then this is misleading.